Alrighty, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And man, once again, I had a great live stream with Dr. Tony Costa last week, and I am blessed again to be able to have Dr. Sean McDowell here on our show, essentially. And so, Sean McDowell is I see him as a legendary apologist. His father is even greater, and this guy, I mean, just to even have him on the show is just a huge privilege. So, Sean, do you want to tell the audience a bit about yourself, or just anything relevant that
Yeah,
they might want to know?
I'd be happy to. But first off, I'm really honored to come on your show. Thanks for reaching out and asking
Yeah.
me. And look, these are sensitive topics, and there's a lot of fear all the way around. And I just sense you're a lot younger than I am. Your willingness and eagerness to speak truth, but do this in the right spirit. I thought this could be a great opportunity to hopefully encourage other people and want to learn myself as well. I teach at Biola University, at specifically Talbot School of Theology. Teach classes in apologetics, problem of evil, the resurrection, reaching Gen Z. I also teach high school part-time and then get to speak and write, and then recently started my own YouTube channel as well. And I'm on Twitter and TikTok. So just basically I'm a communicator. I want to communicate God's word and help people know what they believe and why they believe, and to live with my family here in Southern California.
Awesome. Yeah, I for those of you watching, I linked down to his Twitter, his YouTube channel, and his website, which includes his blog and everything else down in the bio as well. So if you want to check out more of Sean after this conversation, you won't be disappointed at all. And so thank you, Sean. And yeah, with that, let's just let's just get right into it with the topic.
Cool.
So most of I guess I'd say a majority of my audience actually isn't even from the US. And so because of that, I want to make sure that we frame what we're going to talk about today in the right manner, so that one, they can follow what we're saying, but two, we don't misrepresent anything as well. And so, as you see in the title, it's called "Should Christians Support Black Lives Matter?" The organization. And so, what we want to do first and foremost is basically establish, what this organization is, why was it founded, and once we establish that, then we can go ahead and begin to kind of give our 2 cents, each of us, on this question. And so. Just to kind of lead it off, I'll basically just give you a brief introduction. And for those of you who don't know, Black Lives Matter is essentially an organization that was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer. Trayvon Martin was a Black teenager at the time, I believe, who was shot and killed. And as a result of the outrage, as a result of the acquittal, the organization was founded in an effort to basically push back against what they felt they were seeing on an institutional level within the United States. And since then, the movement has grown drastically. And for those of you who have been following the news for the last 3 weeks, you're obviously no stranger to this. You've seen the popularity of Black Lives Matter, especially as they've been more and more on the front lines in the news and in the media in response to the murder of George Floyd and many other events in recent years as well. And so since then, it's basically led to a major conversation and many different opinions from many different groups surrounding whether or not this organization should be supported. And so we as Christians want to give our take as to whether or not we think Christians should support this. And so we aren't going to be speaking for, on behalf of other groups, or I guess everyone else is just unbelievers. But what actually prompted me to even consider this topic for the live stream was a blog post that Sean McDowell himself wrote a couple weeks back about this very issue. And so if I can go ahead and share my screen here, Sean, I'd really like to get your take on this blog post, kind of just, why you wrote it, how you went about it, and what essentially your main argument here was. So if you just give me a second, I'll pull it up here and then we can see. You see it here?
There it is. Yeah, good job.
Awesome. So yeah, why don't you just go ahead and fill us in? So what prompted you to write this, and why'd you go from there?
Well, as you said, this idea of Black Lives Matters has been around about 7 years, but it's only in the past seemingly 2, 3, 4 weeks that it's come to the forefront of cultural conversation. And I just noticed that some of my white friends would talk about the phrase and use it very differently than some of my Black friends. My conservative friends, very different than some of my liberal friends. And I had friends who would go to these protests and hold signs, Black Lives Matters, and I'd ask them about it, and some had clarity, some didn't. And I started thinking, what exactly does this stand for? What does it mean? if I'm confused and I follow these stories and I'm a professor, certainly there's not as much clarity in the minds of other people. Mm-hmm. So bottom line is, I just got the impression people were talking past each other. So it really began by me just getting on the blacklives.com website and starting to read exactly what they stood for. And to be honest with you, I was stunned and I couldn't believe this. Yeah. Some of the things like explicitly pro-choice, explicitly pro-LGBTQ, and I don't mean pro-LGBTQ people. You and I are pro and love the people, but there's a certain narrative within culture trying to change or attempting to change the definition of gender, the nature of marriage, etc. That as Christian gave me pause. There were other things within that I just stopped. I'm like, wait a minute, there's some concern here. Explicit statements about being against the nuclear family. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I'm going to write a post and just try to clarify that I am in favor of every Black life and want to affirm that Black lives do matter. Now, obviously, when you say, well, all lives matters, so many of my Black friends have said, we're not saying Black Lives Matter to dismiss that all lives matter. We're trying to draw attention to the fact that we are a people group that have experienced inequities and injustices, and certain wrongs need to be made right. Mm-hmm. So part of this blog post was try to give permission and challenge some of my white friends to say, look, you can affirm the spirit of what's behind this, that every Black person matters. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I also saw there were a lot of people holding up signs, Black Lives Matters, pushing something without any realization that they might be indirectly giving credence to an organization that undermines what I would argue is the heart of the Christian faith. Amen. So it was meant to bring some clarity for people to say, okay, let's stop talking past each other and let's find a way to have some common ground, but also not compromise and undermine larger movements of justice and the biblical worldview in a way that we don't realize that we're actually doing. So through this, I've had so many conversations, and we could unpack this if it's helpful. But before I posted this, I called some of my white friends who I respect. I'm like, tell me what you think, men and women. I called a few of my Black friends and I said, what am I missing here? Is this framed fairly? And through this, I just learned a ton. For example, a friend of mine, he goes, here's the deal. When most Black people, at least in his experience, say Black Lives Matters, they're not talking about the organization. That's the furthest thing from their mind. At least that's what he said to me. And so many of my white friends, when they hear this, they think of the organization. Mm-hmm. So I thought, oh my goodness, right away, there's conflict and misunderstanding because we don't even understand the differences of what we mean. So that was the heart behind this. And since then, I've had other people contact me, and there's some hate online. I don't care about that. As long as I feel like I'm communicating something generously and truthfully and biblically, that stuff doesn't bother me. But I don't want to undermine my white or my Black brothers by saying anything that's not sensitive and not accurate. Mm-hmm.
That was incredibly well said. And that's why I'm so glad that you took the time to write it, because, there are many people who, let's just be honest, they feel the same way you do, but because of the fact that, essentially all of the media attention that we've seen the last few weeks has, given this organization so much more clout. It's almost as if the two distinctions that you've made, which was a great distinction to make, have become synonymous, where you can't say Black Lives Matter without affirming the organization, and you can't affirm the organization without, giving that spirit of it as well. And unfortunately, a lot of people feel like they have no choice in that matter, because, obviously, if you say the name or if you, post about it or whatever, even if you have the spirit that you were talking about when you post about it, because the name matches, it's the organization that's going to get that attention, and that's going to garner all of the media, the media focus. And so it's very important that you made that distinction. And I'm just praying that this will be talked about enough so that this distinction can once again actually be mainstream. Because were you to say what you just said now, a lot of people would just straight up disagree. But from what you said, I completely can corroborate your observations, because on social media, with people that I follow from high school and college. It was all of the white people, or at least, non-Black people, that were essentially linking to the organization, trying to talk about you can donate to them and all these things. And then it was the Black people who were saying like, hey, our society is being impacted in this way, and we just want you to understand, and we want you to be able to address this issue. It had nothing to do with the organization. And so, yeah, excellent there. And so, were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, if that's okay. I think if I retitled this, I might say something like "Black People Matter," but I won't support BLM. To try to come up with a phrase that says, let's get the spirit of the phrase Black Lives Matter, although I realize it's not the same hashtag, etc. Affirm that truth without the organization. But the problem is, if you Google, at least last I did, Black Lives Matters, guess what comes up?
Exactly.
The organization comes up. The organization does. So I think it's fair to push back on my white friends and go, look, we got to find a way to affirm the spirit of this and work with our Black brothers and sisters and people of every race to make headway on this issue, but also help people who are Black at times maybe realize here's why there is concern amongst some people using the phrase. And frankly, after I posted this, I had a buddy whom I respect and really care for. He's a student, he's an apologist, probably between our two ages, somewhere in the middle. And he's a Black guy, and he contacted me. And he goes, tell me why you posted this. And I said, well, I'm trying to gauge between the middle because there's white people concerned with even saying Black Lives Matters because of the organization. And he says to me, he goes, that thought never even occurred to me. It never occurred to me. On the flip side, it didn't occur to me that when many Black people use this, they're not even talking about the organization and don't care. So that was an example where two of us, brothers in Christ, similar worldview, were not on the same page with this huge social issue. And that can create division and unrest and frustration and pain rather than bringing together. So that was really the heart of what was trying to be accomplished here.
Amen. Yeah. So essentially the bottom line sounds like it's communication that's really necessary. And so especially just because we kind of quickly brush through the actual reasoning behind why you won't support them, I do want to take some time, essentially, just because you kind of create some distinctions here in the article between different sections. And so I do want to take a bit of time just to magnify each one and basically kind of have you give your thoughts specifically as to what it is about this organization that you didn't want to support. So the first reason that you pointed out was the issue of unborn Black lives. And in the blog post, you basically say, and I'll just read it real quick, that in a written response to the 2018 State of the Union address, the BLM website says that we deserve and thus we demand reproductive justice that gives us autonomy over our bodies and our identities while ensuring that our children and families are supported, safe, and able to thrive. And so right off the bat, it's like, you just did an excellent job at explaining the spirit of, why people are out protesting and all of these things. But then one of the first things that we see from their website almost has virtually nothing to do with this actual spirit. It completely 180s to a different issue, and an issue that, we as Christians cannot accept. And so kind of, I guess what I'm asking you is, like, in that research process, when you first read that, when you first kind of saw that and did more research, what was it that was going through your mind when you started to see that this is what they were actually calling for, and that this is what they were supporting?
Well, because I'm a Christian, I've believed for a long time that every single life matters, regardless of gender, regardless of marital status, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, race, in the womb, outside of the womb. And I've also been aware that, like in New York City, there's more, make sure I get this right, I cited it in the article, that, I think you might even have it up there, that it says there are more abortions than live births.
That's correct.
In New York City.
That's correct.
I mean, which is the center of Planned Parenthood. So you go back decades, that has ravished the population in the Black community. Think about how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions more Black people would be alive as a part of society, just contributing as everybody else does if it weren't for this. So I read that, and honestly, it gave me it broke my heart amidst this, because I think every life matters. And the irony to me is that this is an organization that says Black Lives Matters, but it's selective Black lives. It's those that are in line with their political agenda, namely those out of the womb, not those in the womb. So that just struck me as any Christian who is, who takes scripture seriously has to have serious reservations about Black Lives Matters as an organization. Now, I'll tell you this, Io. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. He's about my age, conservative. He's a speaker. He's Black. And he said to me, he goes, I ask questions about the unborn. But he also mentioned, he said, for example, when it came to voting for, I don't even know if he did or not, but when it came to voting for Obama, he said, I look at the issue of life more broadly. So I do care about the unborn, and that concerned me deeply about voting for Obama. He said, but on the flip side, here's a man who loves his wife, cares for his kids, and I thought could help bring an ethic of larger justice to those outside of the womb. Now, I hadn't thought about it that way because I haven't experienced in my life, being a white person, some of the things that he's experienced being a Black person. Mm-hmm. But us talking about this and listening to each other, I think has just brought some clarity. That's what I'm aiming for here.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'm glad that you pointed this out here because, I mean, there are many, sadly, many more stories similar to that of New York where, I mean, you just look at the numbers of, many of these Black aborted children and you think about, I mean, that could have been someone who found the cure for cancer. That could have been someone who, did thus and so. But even if they would have done nothing, that's not the bottom line. The bottom line is that they're a human being, made in the image of God. Exactly. And because of that, they are deserving of life and they are deserving of having that chance, just as we were given that chance. And so it is interesting to hear about those different perspectives, but then you must also think, okay, well, if they're being this open, I guess, about their views from the jump on their own website, how much more really goes on behind closed doors when, I guess I'd say it bluntly, where do you know your money is going? Is my $20 that I'm donating to Black Lives Matter finding its way to Planned Parenthood somehow? Or, what's really going on here? And I think that it's important that you pointed this out because unfortunately, there are so many there are so many political issues and ideas that are so tied that, not because I'm saying this is the way it should be, but this is just because the way it is, that you can't necessarily support one without in some way contributing to the other. Because a lot of these mainstream organizations, such as Black Lives Matter, are in favor of things like Planned Parenthood because that's what society has deemed, is what they want. And sadly, that's the consequence of what we've seen. Just an absolute devastation to the Black community because of this. But it's still interesting to hear about that different perspective. You said that your friend had in regards to voting for Obama.
And the only point was, I tend to look at the issue I have of life probably through the lens of the unborn. And my friend says, I am with you 100% on that. But you also have to see the injustice and a larger ethic of life and how it's hurt the Black community. Mm-hmm. That was eye-opening to me and just a framework I didn't have. That when we listen to each other in these conversations, it helps us just see the different lens and framework that somebody's coming from. That's what I think is helpful. He didn't tell me who he voted for. That wasn't the point. I just wanted to understand where he was coming from and how we look at these issues. But the bottom line is, this is an organization that does not value all lives, and it does not value all Black lives. Yeah. So any Christian who takes scripture seriously and what science shows as well should have some serious reservations about it.
Yeah, and actually, just today before we got on the live stream, I think it was on your Instagram, I saw you made like some TikTok or something responding to some guy about life at conception or something, right? And like, is that right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll tell you quickly what happened is this fellow, he's probably 20 years old, and he just said, sometimes people say science and religion disagree with each other, but here's the case where they agree. Both science and religion, Christianity, agree that the unborn, the fetus, is not a human being until it comes out of the womb. And it had 86,000 likes. It must have had hundreds of thousands or millions of shares. So 2 quick points he makes. He goes, number one, actually, science doesn't tell us when life begins. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Mom's alive, dad's alive, sperm's alive, eggs alive. At conception, it's a living thing. There's zero scientific debate about this. There's none in any embryological textbook I've ever seen. And then he says, and religion agrees with this. He said, for example, Jesus said we need to go back to the law. He says, so let's go to the Talmud and see what the Talmud says. Well, the Talmud was written at least 3 centuries after the time of Jesus. So when Jesus says, let's go back to the law, he couldn't have been referring to something not yet written for 2 to 3 centuries plus. And he posts this on TikTok, and all these people like it without any awareness of how badly it's argued, because it fits the position that they want to push forward and demonize other people. So that's the kind of culture we live in that just poisons any kind of real conversation and understanding.
That you hit the nail on the head. I would have, had I made my own, I don't have a TikTok, but had I made one, I probably would have brought him to like Jeremiah 1 or something, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. But that's great. And so it's great that you're speaking out on those issues. And so that actually leads us to the second issue that you point out in the blog post, which is the idea that Black children matter. So we're dealing with, once they're out of the womb, but now I guess it comes to this idea of family structure and upbringing. And so I'll kind of just read a quick excerpt from it, and then I'll get your take on it. But you basically say that the What We Believe section of their website describes what the organization is about, and they offer their views on sex and marriage. And they say, quote, "We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless she or he or they disclose otherwise." So what do you want to say about that, or kind of give your 2 cents on that?
Well, let me give a little background on this. When you see people talking about terms like heteronormative and overturning heterosexuals, behind this, which is true for much of Black Lives Matters, is really a kind of Marxist thinking, a neo-Marxist thinking that sees the world in oppressor and oppressed. So Marxists famously said the oppressors were those who own the means of production, the bourgeoisie, and they oppress the proletariat, the working class. So the working class rises up through revolution, even violent revolution, and throws off the grip of those in power, and then you'll have a utopian state. One problem is it's never worked in history, and it never will, because it falsely identifies the nature of man and misses the root of what the problem really is. But behind Black Lives Matters is basically this idea of the oppressor and the oppressed. So the oppressors are cisgender white males, and the oppressed are understood in terms of either your biological sex or your sexuality, the way you identify yourself, or your race. So the solution is to throw off these oppressors, even if violence and protest is necessary to reach a higher state of, if you listen to people talk, hear people say, if we can just go through these birth pains, then we'll have a new, just, and equal society. And it's never going to happen for a number of reasons that we could unpack. But here specifically, this is about the oppressive, heteronormative, natural family that says kids need a mom and a dad. So in affirming this queer affirming network, they're basically saying biological sex is irrelevant, marriage is not a man and a woman, and kids don't need a mom and a dad. And the reality is, studies show that across race, across socioeconomic status, having moms and dads together and a father in the life of his kids is so important for the healthy development of that young person.
Amen.
Fatherlessness causes damage to young people. And you know this. There's fatherlessness in the white community, but numbers are higher in the Black community. It's just a reality. So when I look at this and I say Black Lives Matters is basically saying kids don't need a mom and a dad, I look at that and I go, wait a minute. Number one, this contradicts all the sociological data that says kids do need a mom and a dad. And number two, it violates what Scripture says. So in the name of helping people and helping Black lives, again, I think they're actually undermining them by saying they don't need a mom and a dad in their life. That's when I read this, my heart broke, because I'm sure the people at this organization actually think they're doing what's right.
Mm-hmm.
They actually think they're on the side of justice. I don't question motivations. My criticism is a faulty worldview that never really will help solve the problems at hand.
That is, I mean, again, I'm those vindicating feelings are coming back, because, you know, it's like you're reading my mind with what you're saying. And again, you hit the nail on the head. I love the fact that you pointed out the idea of this undermining, essentially, because, I mean, we don't have the studies here in our hands, but there are numerous that show that, you know, if regardless of race or whatever, if a child is in a fatherless home, you know, they're more likely to get expelled from school, more likely to end up in jail, and to get involved with harmful lifestyles that may end up actually hurting them more than helping them. And so this organization is essentially putting the spotlight on this issue of police brutality, but essentially ignoring all of these issues as well, which are also affecting the Black community, and one could argue on a much larger scale. Doesn't mean that what happens over here is okay, but what it means is that, you know, I guess I'd say a good analogy would be like what Jesus said, where it's like you're straining at a gnat but swallowing a camel or something. You know, they're focused on this one thing, but then in the process ignoring, you know, all these other issues that are actually plaguing the community on a grand scale. And the more they push these ideas that we don't need, you know, a mom and a dad, we don't need the traditional structure of a family, you know, decades down the line, you know, assuming they grow in strength and they grow in popularity, they may have, you know, gotten every unjust cop prosecuted, but many of the same issues are still going to be plaguing them, because it's not a matter of what just happens here in this one moment, as bad as it is, but it's also a matter of what's been going on like in their whole life beforehand that truly devastates and leads to destruction within the community, sadly.
I think that's right. And I've been encouraged by some people that have spoken up in the white community and the Black community for just the importance of fathers being involved with their kids. That's not the solution to everything. I think sometimes conservatives say, well, we could fix every problem if we just have fathers in the home. Well, I think that would fix a lot, but there are systemic issues. There are issues in the police force. There are issues in education. Like, there's a lot of issues that are a part of this.
Yeah.
But one of the most important ones, a pillar one, is the natural family doing what we can so kids have a mom and a dad in their life. Amen. If we care about young people of any race, and in particular, young Black people, any movement that aims to undermine that just cannot be acting in their best interest. That's how I see it. And I think the data shows that.
Yeah. And there's actually, I'm going to pull up their About page right now, because there's an even better quote on their What We Believe tab that I feel like highlights exactly what we're discussing. If I highlight it here, it says, I mean, it couldn't be more clear, honestly. It says, we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. So notice the specifications surrounding mothers, but you never even see the word father. I just thought that was kind of telling.
You know what? That is interesting. But also notice the worldview behind this. We disrupt.
Yeah.
This is a very Marxist kind of language. We protest, we unsettle, we break down the Western prescribed. So in other words, when it says Western prescribed, it doesn't mean it's natural to the world itself. It's something we've invented, and it's oppressive to society as a whole. Therefore, if we can throw off this false shackle and this invented idea of family, therefore we could usher in a better age. But the problem is the natural family is not invented. It's not Western prescribed. It's human prescribed. It's written on our DNA. It's written on our bodies. It's written into the natural world itself. So one of the huge differences I just want people to see here is the professor in me is always looking at ideas. Is part of the idea behind this is saying that we don't look to nature within itself the way it objectively is and read out of nature. Rather, we're supposed to read into nature certain things and beliefs that we have about the way the world should be. So take Romans 1. Christians look at Romans 1 and say, oh, God has designed us to function a certain way. There is such a thing as biological sex. There is such a thing as marriage. There is such a thing as family. And we're only free when we orient our lives to this truth that's written into reality itself. This is not how Black Lives Matter is seeing it. They are seeing what we believe is inherent within nature as these oppressive structures that have been invented in certain Western circles. And if we just throw them off, then we can have a utopian age. So that worldview difference undergirds almost all the differences between Black Lives Matters, and what I would argue is the Christian worldview.
Amen. Yeah, and that is so cool. That is so cool. I mean, not cool, but it's interesting to see how, you mentioned toward the beginning, those Marxist ideas, and you can see those echoes of it, within their own personal statements, because the reality is, I mean, exactly what you said, no amount of disruption or rebellion can ever change who we are by nature. Because when we try to shed those ingrained ideas about family structure and, all of these things, it's essentially us trying to be something we're not. And when we do that, we eventually find out that we can't. And ultimately we make our way back until we begin the cycle all over again. It's essentially, I mean, like, I don't want to get too theological with this, but it's essentially just like what Israel was in the Old Testament. They'd be with God, they'd recognize their true nature as children of him, but then they'd rebel, think they could find more freedom by disrupting what the norm was. And then ultimately they face ruin and then come back and start the cycle all over again. Now, I pray this isn't a cycle that we find ourselves locked in, but ultimately the only thing that can free them is, Christ and the reality of being a Christ follower. But as an unbeliever, I mean, I don't essentially, their view's faulty, but I don't necessarily blame them, because I recognize that sincerity, and I recognize that when they don't have that, I guess I'd say that spiritual mindset that we as Christians have, you can see how they want to essentially just point the finger at all these different things that they think, if we could just remove, if we could just get rid of, then we'll find peace. Then we'll find that contentment that we need in life. But, if that were really the case, we would have had it by now, but that's just my thoughts.
Aya, one of the key differences is when we look at, say, the book of Judges and this cycle of sin that the people of Israel went through. They were part of a covenant with God in which no matter how much pain and hurt there was, God was going to bring a king through them and ultimately the Messiah. There is no equivalent covenant with the United States, besides what some people have argued in the past. There's not. There's no guarantee that we're going to come out of this. There's no guarantee that we're going to learn some of the lessons of our failed past and be better for it. That's not a guarantee. So I think there's a lot of things being taken for granted right now that could come back and bite us, especially with such a spirit I'm seeing of breaking down, disrupt, destroy. That never ultimately ends well and can't be the heart of the solution to fixing this and remedying the past and having a more equitable society.
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess if we wanted to segue it now, because in your, let me see if I can, because I think that was the last section from your blog. You basically kind of just sum it up and say,
there's a few other points as you go on their website. I decided to just make two for length.
Yeah.
But those are the only two I really go through. You're right, in the blog itself.
Yeah, but I wanted to basically highlight that exact issue you pointed out, which is basically what this has morphed into, because now we're not necessarily on the other side of it, but we're far enough now. We're far along now. I can't even talk. We're far enough along now to see the consequences of this, and so what's going on in Seattle, all of the statues being torn down, all of the people getting shot and just, I mean, straight up mistreated, all in the name of this, what we thought was this idea of Black lives, having importance, but then now it's quickly morphed into something ugly. And I think something that, we're going to find that once we reach that dead end, there's nothing truly there. I don't know. You've been watching the news, I assume. You're probably no stranger to what we've been seeing. So are there any types of thoughts you'd want to share?
Well, in some ways, it's hard to know what is true. If you watch CNN, you think these are 100% peaceful protests leading to racial unity. This is the best thing that's ever happened. If you watch Fox News, they're all opportunistic looters, and this is only about destroying the country. Well, there's probably some truth in both of these. Fox News is right on some, CNN is right on some, but they both have an agenda, and they both have blinders that they're bringing to this. which is why I listen to both. And sometimes it drives my wife nuts, but I'm like, I have to get some balance. What am I missing? What's happening here? So I've actually had, to be honest with you, as I watch the news on all sides of this, it's kind of jaded me a little bit towards realizing so many people are about ratings. So many people are about their pet agendas and not really willing to listen to the other side. So I'll just tell you a conversation that I have. Look, given my background, when I see some of the protests that are taking place, not the protests that are peaceful, I mean the looting and the people that have been hurt and the stuff that is stolen, my instinct is just that's wrong. They're breaking the law. It's opportunistic. Well, I was speaking with a Black friend of mine who a good friend of mine, a peer, deeply respect him. And he goes, I'm a little less reluctant to judge. I said, okay, tell me about that. He said, you've had people already, many of them in tough economic situations. And then you go into COVID for 2 or 3 months, it's shut down. There's an awful lot of people who are just trying to eat the next day and make ends meet. Now, that was a different framework that he brought. And I think there's probably some of both. There's a ton of looters that are taking advantage. I mean, even my kids had friends contact them. They're like, hey, let's go break in and go steal stuff. And they're like, no, fortunately. But there's also a lot of people who are hurting. But what happens through this is we're so quick to take one experience, one person, one narrative, and write everybody off in that group through that one narrative. And that doesn't help understanding and moving forward in common ground and really healing our past. So I'm seeing a lot of people who are hurting. And as Rick Warren said, hurt people hurt people. There's a lot of pain that's coming out right now. Demonization and tribalism that's happening all over this. Few people sitting down and just saying, okay, tell me how you experience this. Tell me what you think. At least help me understand. So my dad put it to me this way. He said, son, it's more important to understand than to be understood. I mean, think about that. It's more important to understand than to be understood. What if everybody right now just said, okay, help me understand you first? Wouldn't that be helpful? So I've actually tried to do that with Black Lives Matter's organization. I've tried to read it and understand where they're coming from. I don't know too many people on that side who have at least tried to understand where I'm coming from and show the same charity to me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying more Christians do this than the other side. That's not my point. I have no stake in numbers. But until more Christians and more conservatives and more liberals are at least willing to begin charitably with understanding somebody else's experience and showing sympathy, we're not going to make any progress as a nation that's lasting and brings real reconciliation.
Yeah, that's a great point, because sometimes it's not, because sometimes even if you're on one side of something and you think you're genuinely right, you may be right. If you don't take the time to sit down with those people, you can be right all day long, but you're going to be right in a room alone, because the people that you're trying to reach will have been pushed out. They'll have been pushed aside. And so there's more to development and discourse than just having the right answer. It's definitely about being able to work through that process of communication with those people so that you can hopefully see where they're coming from and vice versa. And that actually, I should have told you this. I didn't even remember until you said what your dad said just now. But I think, because I was browsing your site and I was looking at your articles and stuff, and somewhere on the site or on your Twitter or something, I must have seen that quote about you want to understand where, because when you said, I was like, oh, I've heard that. That was right. I was reading. And, a couple of days ago, I was thinking about it and I told myself, at times I can find myself, doing that, even if I feel like I'm justified in what I may believe about something. Oftentimes, especially because of how charged things are nowadays, I find myself kind of slipping into just wanting to get those points essentially, or being able to say oh, I'm right and you're wrong. And so I stopped myself and I said, and this is kind of building off of what your dad said. I said, maybe the next time someone says something to me about anything and I disagree with them, maybe I should instead of saying, how can I refute that? Maybe I should ask myself, what can I learn from that? And through that process, I can then work, if I still think I'm, if I want to tell this person about what I believe, through that process, I can then understand what that person is saying and hopefully come to some kind of reconciliation with them. That's the exact situation I'm in right now, actually. Just with witnessing, there's this one person I know actually from college who is a Muslim, and I've been talking to them, and they've just been asking me a ton of questions, and like it's been pretty exhausting, but it's really helped me kind of practice, not just because this is someone's eternity we're talking about. It's not just an hour, 2 hour debate. So we've been talking for multiple days back and forth, and I've really just been trying to learn how to not just simply say, okay, like, what don't I agree with when it comes to that, but what is what they're saying about whatever this is actually show about what they're thinking and kind of what their experiences are. And so that's a great point that you made.
I think it's beautiful. Look, I've had a chance to preach in a mosque. I've taken students on trips to mosques. I've had a number of conversations with Muslims. It's not my primary focus. So there's other people far more well-versed in Islam than I am. But in some of my conversations, I'll just ask Muslims, I'll say, hey, tell me what you love most about your faith. What's the hardest part about your faith to live out? Tell me just how you practice your faith. What misconceptions do you think people have about your faith? How do you practice it differently than your parents? Like, these are just questions of understanding that invite conversation and dialogue and common ground that creates safety, I think, to differ with somebody in a substantive manner when that comes up. And the reality is, it's human nature. We're just threatened when people see the world differently. It's human nature. I don't pretend to have this down, but I got to check myself all the time and go, okay, am I being as charitable to that person as I would want them to be to me? Am I listening first? I mean, the Bible has a lot to say about, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's a fool who speaks before he listens. So one of the things that I've come to is I can't control this larger narrative, and some of the stuff going on right now, I know you feel this way too. It's heartbreaking to see what's happening in our country. I mean, I've lost sleep over it, and I know people are just suffering far more than I am. And, I look at this, I go, I can't control so much what is going on, but I can control how I respond. So hopefully I'm responding graciously to people. Hopefully I'm listening. Hopefully I'm willing to change. And there's been a handful of things I've learned through this that are kind of painful to admit that I wish I had understood earlier that were blind spots for me. So I just hope, just like you said, if our response can be, what can I learn from this? I think people would be surprised at Christians, a willingness to listen, a willingness to understand, a humility, which, by the way, is supposed to be one of the defining characteristics of what it means to be a Christian. But I think that's hard for us because we feel like if I listen and try to understand, I'm affirming that you believe something different. That doesn't follow. Let's be great listeners. Let's understand. Let's learn through this. And like it says in 1 Peter 3:15, if somebody asks, then be ready for an answer for the hope within.
Amen. Yeah, and I think a great book too, which kind of helps, I guess, harness this and practice this is Greg Koukl's, Tactics. Now, it's more in the context of like apologetics, but in the book, kind of his 2 main strategies are really just asking a person, like basically just asking them questions. So like, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about fill in the blank? And then if they say something, it's like, okay, well, how did you come to that conclusion? And I think one, it allows people to actually articulate and really maybe for the first time think about what it is they believe and why, which kind of helps kind of put the spotlight on them. But then 2, it's also helping you because by you actually learning and being able to do those things, you can then address the situation more strongly, because that's what both sides essentially want, right? They want to be able to address the situation in the way that they feel is the wisest and the best. But that can't happen if you don't know all the information, and so that's crucial what you said about just, you may have not known a few things. Dude, I'm 20. I don't know a lot of things, right? But it's that willingness which sets you apart, because you can only go up the more time goes on. And so all that matters is that you leave yourself open to that. And so that's great.
Here's a practical thing I've tried recently with people when they're willing to have this conversation. If I know somebody voted, and I'm not going to talk about who, because who is irrelevant to this, whether you voted for, say, Trump or Obama, people have in their minds why people voted for Obama. and why they voted for Trump. So I would encourage somebody, since Trump is president, if somebody didn't vote for him, to have in your mind why you think people actually do. And then ask people, can you tell me, and I just want to understand, why did you vote for him? And do the same with Obama. And I think most people would realize that they have a perception about other people and why they do what they do that at least doesn't match up with the motivations that those people have. Now, you might still think they're wrong and shouldn't have voted that way, but it's amazing that we don't even understand what motivates people to act the way that we do. So therefore, it's much easier to demonize them. Mm-hmm. But when we have charity towards people and assume the best, and try to understand first, at least we can find some common ground and treat the person more humanely. Now, I'm not saying that because I got that perfectly down, but these are some of the things I'm trying to get better at in my own life towards others as well.
Yeah. And a great thing about that too is what you said earlier about how it's human nature to kind of put your guard up when someone doesn't agree with you. When they see that you're willing, even if they may know you disagree with them, when they see that, you're just talking with them and you genuinely are interested in what they believe and why, it really allows a lot of that guard to come down. Like, I don't know if you know Ray Comfort, but he goes around sharing the gospel at Huntington. Yeah. And I love watching his videos because he talks to people my age and I like seeing how they respond. And in one of his videos, he actually says something pretty interesting about how how this happens a majority of the time, where once he interviews them and the camera's off, like after it's over, he'll be like around the campus kind of going around finding different people to interview. And he literally says how like the people he'll have just interviewed will be like following him around, not like to cause him trouble or anything. Yeah. But he said that like, because like usually like when the camera comes off, they tell him like a lot of like, serious stuff in their lives and stuff. Yeah. And so once they know that he cares, it's like, I think it's a spiritual thing. It's like they have this kind of like drawing to him where it's like, I don't know what it is about that guy, but I want more of that, and they see that love in him. And that's why I think he does a great job at walking that line, because he's going to give them the gospel. He's going to give them the truth, but he's going to do it in such a way where they know when they walk away that he's only doing it out of love for them and, true, genuine care for them. And I think people are drawn to that because we're so used to having it just be an all out gladiator arena between ideas. And so that's it's bringing to mind a lot of things for me right now, especially because let's be honest. I don't want to be a pessimist, but it's June. As things get closer to November, it's going to get worse, and so the task will really be on us to make sure that we are controlling how we respond so that we can hopefully be that sense of, we can hopefully be that light, during this time of just intense back and forth. And so that I think will really be the challenge for all of us as Christians, to really just, regardless of what we believe, make ourselves available and accessible to those people so that they can see that we are truly there for them because, they're made in the image of God, and that we want to ultimately, give them the gospel and be that light to them.
Amen. I think that's beautiful. And look, as we move towards November, I hope that Christians would remember our ultimate hope is not in politics. Yeah. Believe it or not, part of the neo-Marxist thinking is actually things can be solved through the government, and that at least through overthrowing it and ushering new people in. Well, it's not going to. Sure, we need to be involved in political science and secure religious freedom and fight for the oppressed. Like, I get all that. When it's all said and done, my confidence as a Christian is not in some political party or some political candidate. Mm-hmm. That's a thing that we need to be very careful about, where our allegiance is and why.
Amen. Because it's gonna get a lot tougher, and I think it's not bad to say that, because if we recognize it, and the sooner we accept it, the sooner we can prepare ourselves to be able to respond to it in a Christ-like manner. Because if we just keep our blinders on and then we go straight into November, we're gonna be caught with our pants down, essentially, and we're going to be, the ones that essentially, normally we call out, right? We should be the ones that are different. And so, man, so glad to just basically get your 2, 4, 6 cents on you on all these things. It was really great talking with you. And I think it was really a breath of fresh air too, because the temptation is to kind of fall back into this one tribe or another. And so it's really great to hear that, you're just doing your best to approach a situation with kind of common sense approach. And it's really inspiring for me, you know, as a younger guy, just to be able to do that as well, because I mean, this is the world that my generation is going to, you know, inherit. And so making it the best. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So you're conservative, you're Christian. I think you're 20 or lower 20s.
20, yeah.
Do you feel pressure to support an organization, or will be considered a betrayer in some fashion? Like, do you feel that pressure, or what's it from your side as you look at the organization? So I'm looking for, what did you agree with in mine? What are some things that maybe you just saw differently so I can understand?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, so the first question regarding the pressure. In my personal life, like with the actual people I interact with, there is not much pressure, just because, I mean, I hang out with other Christians, and and you know, we kind of agree with each other on a lot of things. Now, that was a different story when I was in college, you know, because the school I was at, extremely liberal. And again, I mean,
public school, state school in California, for context. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you are there, even if it may not be directed like at you as an individual, there's so much of this rhetoric that's put out where it's like, if you knew you said something about, like, you know, a certain thing or whatever, I mean, they'd be piranhas, you know, they'd be ready to come for you. So if I'm honest, when I was definitely in college, I kind of had to think twice about what I said and when I said it, not because I was rude or unloving, but just because people disagree and they would go after you, you know, like it's that cancel culture that we live in. So now that I'm out of that, I mean, that's kind of a bygone thing. And that's actually why I started this channel, you know, because it gave me an outlet to basically just express myself and really just do something. Because when I was there, it was spiritually, it was tough, you know, because I was in an environment where there was just so much pressure to, I mean, basically support everything BLM is supporting here and much more. And so it was a little tough.
So is that because you're just young and young people are expected to?
No, because skin color. Yeah.
Assumption about your skin color is you would support an organization that is probably supported by a political party. And if you don't, you're betraying in some fashion. So you feel like you got to really watch what you're saying. Because I feel like I have to watch, if I just say the wrong thing unintentionally, you know, it's going to be cancel and game over for me. So I just try to be as thoughtful and careful and nuanced as I can, out of a desire to be respectful to people too. But you're saying that as a young Black conservative man, you felt the same kind of constraints and concern that maybe those more to the left of you probably didn't feel, that people would come after them. Is that fair? Or
absolutely.
What would you add to that? Okay.
No, it's absolutely true. And before the live stream, you know, I mentioned this to you. I said, I mean, if we were the same age and we were in college at the same time, if we were side by side saying the exact same things, even though like I had that pressure on me, they would be much more quick to call you a racist or to ostracize you because of your skin color. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't face that backlash, but the reality was that there were certain expectations based off of how you looked. But one thing that I really think God did through me when I was there was essentially teach me not to care. Now, it doesn't mean I was reckless and I just, you know, was I guess I'd say like, I had no sympathy for people. But when I was there, you know, I didn't have a plethora of like, you know, friends or anything, because most people were hostile to Christianity. It was just not something they were about. I would give the gospel, but there were no like really strong Christians I would interact with too much. And I really tried. But being alone there, you know, and having my views and just trying to live for God in that environment really helped me to just learn to stop caring what other people think of me, you know, because my mind was thinking, well, you know, here I am in this apartment alone in school, and it's just me and God, right? And if it's just me and God, and here I am now, then why do I have to? I'm living for God when it's the toughest like this. So when things get back to normal, or, you know, I can finally find that point where I have that community, I'm not going to stop living for God, you know, because he's been the one who's there when it was just me and all the pressure was on me. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. So this is not only from your peers. You're at you were at a state school, California, and you majored in poli-sci.
Yeah.
So did you feel like your classes were just completely to one side or the other, or was it somewhat balanced? I'm actually really curious about your experience.
Yeah. Here, I'll put this question down. I'll come back to
Oh,
it.
then
But
we'll take that question.
yeah,
Sorry, I'm
that's
not
okay.
trying to take over the interview. I'm intrigued with.
You're like flipping it on me.
Sorry, I'll be done. Last question.
So ironically, you know something? I mean, okay, in terms of ratios, it was like 90-10 liberal to conservative, you know. But God in His grace just helped me, and it wasn't even like I was finding it. It just happened naturally. I would talk with people in class, and we'd start having conversations, and it was funny because in that environment, you assume that they're very liberal, and so I would talk with them, and I would kind of like dance around issues a bit, and then they would like agree with me on some certain things, and we talk more and more. And before we knew it, we realized we were like both conservative, but we just didn't outright say it because of all the pressure.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So God was gracious to help me come into contact with those people that I still talk to today. In terms of professors, overwhelmingly pretty liberal. But what was really nice was that, again, same thing. Like God was very gracious to me. I had a few professors that we would literally agree on a lot of things. And this sounds bad now that I think about it, but like during class, like we'd be like in group stuff, and I'd have the professor come over to me, and like we'd sit in the corner and like talk about news, and they would whisper because they were like, "Oh, I know I can't say what I think because I know that like the school would."
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it was crazy.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of my just conservative friends, white and black, have just said, I'm going to be quiet for a while, not because I don't want to speak out, but because the mob is so aggressive. It's just lose. But those, at least on the far left, don't feel that way. So certain voices seem to dominate because, like in the classroom, and I think the wider culture, the cancel culture is far more likely to come from the far left than it is from the right. Yeah. And so certain voices are muted. So the perception is not always the reality of where people necessarily stand on some of these theological, philosophical, and cultural issues.
One quick thing I want to add, which actually reinforces what you were saying throughout this whole live stream, was that the reason so initially when I started college, I was under sign language major because I know sign language. I did it in high school, but I didn't like it when I got there. And it was actually because of all the politics surrounding it. Like the classes would be more about like the politics than actually learning the language. And so it was just a huge turnoff to me. And I was just like, I don't really know if I want to do this. Yeah. But then, so once I stopped it, I knew I was going to change my major, but I didn't know what I was going to change it to. And I actually, this was my freshman year. I had a professor who was liberal. Like, I mean, she was liberal. She said like the first day of class, like, oh, like I don't like Trump or anything. And I was like, okay, I mean, that's not surprising. It's what I expect here. But she said, like, even though I feel this way, like I seriously like welcome your guys's opinions. Like she actually really made sure she did that. And through that, yeah, I mean, there were a few conservative people in the class, and so it was cool being able to connect with them.
Good.
And we would talk about everything. We would talk about like the anthem kneeling back when that was like a huge thing. We talk about all of that. And so we actually talked about we had to write an essay about the Confederate statues and like whether or not they should be torn down and stuff. And I wrote about it. And because I knew that she was open, even though I know she disagreed like on a lot of like political issues, it actually helped me to not hold back in terms of when I wrote it. And it was through that I actually found out I'm a really good writer. And then she noticed that and she was like, you should consider changing your major to English or something. And so I danced around that, but then I was like, okay, well, I want to do like some type of political writing. So then I got to political science, right? So had she not been like that, who knows what I'd be doing right now? I probably wouldn't be having this YouTube channel, So
well, it's good to know there's some people that still value education over indoctrination. Good for her.
Amen. All right. So I just want to answer this quick question real quick, and then, we'll wrap it up. So it says, do either of you find our politically correct culture a hindering to witnessing? I have so many people I know who can't have a civil conversation with someone who has a different point of view than them on many topics. You want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I think more than our PC culture is just human nature. It's bigger. It always has been. I mean, there are people that shot down Jesus, didn't want to listen to Jesus. They had people like the rich young ruler who walked away and Jesus let him walk away. So more than blaming our PC culture, which contributes to this, I think is just flat out human nature and the fact that the gospel is offensive. Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, I found that most people in the right situation at the right time are actually willing to have meaningful spiritual conversations. And that's probably not over the Thanksgiving dinner table when people are sitting there, there's family. It might not be in the car when you're rushing somewhere. I mean, there's some wisdom that's being used. But I find the vast majority of people, just in my experience, that if I treat them with a golden rule the way I would want to be treated, I listen and treat them respectfully. They might disagree with me, but they're willing to have that kind of spiritual conversation. So what the PC culture has done is, in the minds of many people, I think demonized the Christian worldview because it's perceived as not being PC. So there's sometimes more layers because the way the narrative is framed that we have to work through to get to the gospel. But I still think most people today actually want to discuss spiritual things if they know you're safe, if they know you'll listen, and I think if you love them and you're thoughtful.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I found personally that because even this Muslim that I'm talking to, I went to college with them, right? So I've seen all of their the stuff they posted and all of that. And it's funny because I remember thinking man, if I ever talk to them about the gospel, I feel like they would be one to just get super offended by it. And it's funny because now I'm actually doing it and it's the complete opposite. And I think part of that is because it's really just us two, meaning if I were to ask her in public, maybe around friends or something or
That's
whatever, it would just be a much different conversation. But when we get away from the media, when we get away from how the PC culture can contribute, it's not the sole thing. Yes, I still have to grapple with those human nature aspects. That's why we've been going back and forth so much. But just being able to just calmly just say, okay, hey, what do you believe about this? Why? I've literally just been letting them ask me question after question, and just showing them in love that, hey, I'm willing to answer what you want to ask. And that's really, I think, just broken down a lot of those walls that would normally be sky high because of the time in which we live. And so there's going to be an aspect of it that you can't avoid because, as Sean said, it's human nature. But I think if you really can just make it a point to go, and that's why I like that Ray talks with them one-on-one. If you can just make it a point to go with them and just say, hey, forget about what CNN says, forget about what Fox says. This is just you and me talking as people. Let me hear what you have to think on this. It really, I think you'll find that you'll make a lot more, you'll have a lot more progress in it. So, yeah.
Well, you're doing great work. I think your voice is really important, the way you've thought about this, your experience, your age, being younger. As someone a few steps ahead and just in life and age, one of the big reasons I want to come on is learn you and hear your story, but also just encourage you to keep it up. We need people to speak. It's clear you have a heart for people and a kindness about you, but you have some convictions, and that's needed today. So thanks for having me on. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation.
No problem, Sean. Thank you so much. This is a huge blessing and an opportunity. I got to think about going to Biola now. I don't know. I'm thinking about,
There's nothing to think about. I even wore my Biola shirt.
Oh, there you go.
Come study at Talbot, get a master's. Seriously, come study apologetics or theology. We would love to have you and partner with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, guys, like I said towards the beginning, I've linked to Sean's Twitter page, his blog, his website, and his YouTube channel down in the description box below. So be sure to definitely check out his stuff. He's got a lot of great books about the resurrection. And by the way, I know a lot of you watch David Wood as well. He was just on his channel last week as well, talking about the disciples and their willingness to die for their faith. And so much more from Sean there that you can look at if you're willing. And thank you for tuning in. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day. God bless you.